to Bruce. Bruce.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you for the introduction. I will begin by just sharing a little bit about the Sacramento Art Deco Society. We're an organization that's been in existence for almost 30 years. 2021 is going to be our 30th anniversary. I actually joined in '99, but we are a multifaceted organization that are pretty much interested in the time period between World War I and World War II. And we do a variety of activities from lectures, road trips. We have a holiday gala. We have events where people have an opportunity to dress up in vintage attire. And it's a wonderful organization, and I've fully enjoyed being a part of it, and look forward to the next 10 years. With that, I'll get into the lecture. I shared earlier that this lecture was originally scheduled for March 16th of 2020 and was canceled because of the pandemic. And so I've had an opportunity to massage this presentation, and originally I was thinking of really concentrating on architecture. Half of the presentation is still concentrated on architecture, but I took an opportunity to delve into local archives, anyone who has ever had a lecture of mine before knows that I am a passionate believer in and promoter of various archives and libraries in town. So I did another dive into some of these institutions and just found some terrific artifacts. So the last half of this presentation will be really delving into the artifacts I found and the wonderful artists behind these pieces. So with that, I'll get started. First, I want to give a thanks to the Renaissance Society. Originally, the event was co-sponsored with Sacramento Public Library on March 16th. And I'm going to do something different than I haven't done. I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble on the Art Deco period, because I'm often asked, and I find it's even rewarding for me to kind of reflect back to actually what is Art Deco. You know, it's one thing to look at it, and I've always appreciated the fact that the Art Deco period, which the dates are up, that you can see is a very vast array of different styles, different mediums, everything from fashion and clothing to film to architecture. As I said, this presentation will really focus on not so much the entertainment world, but the world of architecture and design. This first image is really, I always start any explanation of the Art Deco period by a short explanation of the Exhibition des Arts Décoratifs that was in Paris in 1925. And this was the event that really was in the early years of Art Deco. Art Deco was already existing truly in Europe, even in its infancy before World War I, but it came to full fruition in 1925. And what you're seeing is a postcard of the central fountain of the event. And it was a 50-foot high Lalique glass fountain. All of those light streams are water streams coming out of the fountain. And this was quite an epic event. It attracted artists, designers, architects from all over the world, including in America. And so when we talk about Art Deco in America, many of the important design players were at this event and brought home what they saw and what intrigued them to America. I'm also asked, what influenced the Art Deco movement? Well, it's quite a broad spectrum, and I'll go through just a half dozen of them. Of course, Art Deco is always seen as an artistic movement, so it was very highly influenced by all of the early 20th century art movements: Art Nouveau, Cubism, the Bauhaus, Futurism, and even more. And of those, the four I just mentioned, Art Nouveau really spanned 2 centuries. It really started in the 1880s, 1890s, and really existed up through and prior to World War I, where Cubism was in the early part of the century, and Bauhaus and Futurism really happened during the 20s and the 1930s. Another one that many Art Deco people is Sergei Digilev's Ballet Russe, which was a fabulous, fabulous production and ballet company out of Paris, but they traveled the world. And their costuming, their choreography was highly, highly influential in the Art Deco world. There was also, of course, an appreciation for early civilizations, including the Mayans and the Egyptians. New forms of transportations that emphasized speed. And then there were all these new materials that really gave designers an opportunity to almost create the modern look through metal, steel. Bakelite, of course, was an early plastic. And I gave the example of glass bricks because I think everybody has kind of a vision of buildings and places with glass bricks. Art Deco's many subsets. So I've always thought that another way of looking at the Art Deco period is actually through the different subsets, or what we would maybe call genres of Art Deco. Art Deco is a broad umbrella, but there are many subsets. One is French High Deco, which is kind of like what I might have expected to see in great quantities at the 1925 Decorative exhibition in Paris. Of course, I mentioned there was great, great interest in Egypt and Africa and the Mayan cultures during the 20s. Skyscrapers. Skyscrapers, of course, came on in the early 20th century, and we had some of the premier skyscrapers built in the 20s and 30s. And of course, we think of New York City when we think of skyscraper. Zigzag and geometric, this would be all the designs that we see in triangle shapes, chevron shapes. And then Streamline, Moderne, and Neon, which were, even though, for example, Neon was created in Europe, it was really in America where it was used to great effect, along with Streamline, Moderne, which was almost used as almost a marketing tool as well as tied to all the new forms of transportation. And then machine age, and this is thinking about items that were just so beautifully done industrially, giant cogwheels or giant transformers that take on their own aesthetic beauty, and many times they were streamlined in shape and form to kind of tie into the era. So this led me to another interesting question in my head, and the thought was, what would it be to kind of look and test out the audience knowledge base on Art Deco? And unfortunately, we're not all in the same room together, so I could, get kind of a, dare I say, the pulse of the audience. But in this particular case, I've come up with a short test, and of course, I just want to keep the answers to yourself because everyone is muted, but it'll give you an opportunity to just kind of think and see if we're all in agreement on major pieces and subjects of the Art Deco period. So I have 6 questions here, and I'm going to read them off, give you a second to think about it, and then see what particular thoughts, ideas, or pictures come to mind. First, number 1, what do you think Art Deco's most favorite animal subject might have been? Well, what came to me first was a gazelle. And there's much interest in examples of gazelles, as well as deer and stag renditions in the Art Deco style. Number 2, Art Deco's most influential king. Well, of course, that would be King Tut. His sarcophagus, his tomb was discovered in the early 20s, and there had already been an Egyptian mania across the planet, but King Tut put it into full gear, and there was many renditions of Art Deco styled items, buildings, really mimicking the Egyptian look. Oh, I got ahead of myself. I'm going to back up even though what's the most important building? Oops, I apologize. I just went out of the, well, that's interesting. There we go. I need to go back a couple. I apologize for that. Most important building would be, of course, the Chrysler Building. Although additional examples, of course, would be the Empire State. Even in San Francisco, there are some wonderful skyscrapers. In Los Angeles, maybe the Richfield Building. But they each had their own unique style. But as you can see in the case of the Chrysler Building, it fits a couple of categories beside skyscraper. It has diamond shapes. It has rounded shapes. So you could almost call it zigzag. Number 4 would be Art Deco's most influential art school and movement. And each of the questions are going to get a little bit more difficult as we go along. And that would be the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was a school that opened in 1919 in Germany. And it was an interesting combination of skill bases between the fine art world and the applied design world. And it also included architecture. And it had Walter Gropius was its first president, but it also, just prior to when it was closed in 1933, because of the new Nazi government that came into power, its last president was Mies van der Rohe, which is a very, very familiar name in modern art of the 20th century. Number 5, Art Deco's most quintessential form of transportation. Well, for me, that's Streamline trains. They were beautiful, both inside and out. And while aircraft, such as the DC-3, had come on the scene, they were much smaller, much more modest. They were exciting. But for my money, in Streamline Moderne design, there's nothing greater than the trains. And number 6, Art Deco's most significant WPA water project in the Southwest. And I was thinking of Hoover Dam. And this image kind of shows these giant turbines. This would qualify under the term machine age, where the industrial shape is so interesting and so intriguing, it becomes its own art form. So then I had the idea of, could I find each of these elements in Sacramento in some form or shape? And I was successful. This first is the actual 1939 Sacramento Junior College yearbook. And in this case, they didn't use a gazelle, they used a panther, which of course is their mascot. I wasn't able to find a good example of King Tut, but I did find this wonderful bas relief that's on the entrance area of the California State Library. And I'm anticipating, I wasn't able to actually nail it down, but I believe it's basically a deity of knowledge. We don't really have a true Art Deco skyscraper, but we do have this wonderful postmodern Art Deco designed stylistically tower on the Cesar Chavez, the Plaza Tower that was built in the early 90s. Moving on, for the Bauhaus, there was this terrific bas relief that was discovered, or at least identified by one of our members, Gary Miller, about 20 years ago. It's on the building that was originally the Ranselhof's or Beaumarchais. And if you know our society, it was eventually recommended and agreed that it would be a terrific logo for our society. Under transportation, Well, because we're blessed to have a wonderful railroad museums, we do have some Streamline engines. And this is a Western Pacific electromotive engine. And it's great that we have an example. And actually, I noticed in the back of this picture, the museum also has a terrific Streamline dining car. And finally, speaking of water projects, this is a WPA relief that's in Sacramento. And I'm going to get into this particular piece more because it's tied to a whole series of reliefs. So I was pleased that while identifying 6 different types of Art Deco prestigious items, I was able to find, really wonderful comparisons here in Sacramento. So now I'm going to move into architecture, and I'm going to first talk about some more high deco buildings, and then I'm going to talk and look at more streamlined buildings. So for my money, this is the most classic high deco building in Sacramento. It's on K Street. It's the S.H. Crest building. And it just has all the bells and whistles of the period. It has wonderful decoration. It's all terracotta in front. It has multiple elements, from floral to chevrons, vertical piers. If you look at the spandrels or the areas between the vertical piers, there's some wonderful decoration on the spandrels above the second floor windows. And then the canopy just has some great details. And this is looking up at the building at the corner of the canopy. And you can see once again that it has just great linear work, chevrons at the top, triangles at the bottom. Just a really well-detailed piece. And this is one building that once again has kind of struggled. I've worried about its future. It's still standing. It does have city designation as a historic building, but in this era, I'm always concerned for buildings. So hopefully there's a large empty lot next door. I hope it gets filled so that part of K becomes more vibrant, and hopefully, this building gets a long-term tenant. This is looking at the, I guess it'd be the northwest corner, some of the detail. And then here's a more close-up of that, just wonderful terracotta. You can also see how the terracotta was assembled in multiple pieces. This is a building literally a half block away. This is the southeast corner of 9th and K. This is the Forum building. And the Forum building went through many iterations. It was built in 1911 as a 6-story. Actually, it'd be 1911 as a 6-story. 1917, it was raised 4 more stories with a wonderful kind of cornice crown. And then in the mid-30s, it was kind of decoized. And you're actually looking, it's hard to see, but the lower floors have wonderful Gladding McBean terracotta. This is the entrance of the building as it looks today. And it has, once again, multiple high deco as well as streamlined details. It has stair steps, triangles. I love how it moves up to floral pattern at the top. A detail of the building's name signage, and I love the deco lettering. And then these aluminum panels. Aluminum allowed for casting that was inexpensive and durable. And it's just wonderful that this building has etching and wonderful aluminum details. This building is another favorite of mine, and it's actually part of a whole complex of buildings. And this is at Mather Field. Of course, now it's known as Mather Park. And it was originally, when it was first created in the 30s, it was known as the Sacramento Art Deco. The United States Army, of which the Army Air Corps was prior to the US Air Force, they were looking to have 4 centralized service facilities across the nation to basically centralize repair of aircraft. And Sacramento was chosen. And it was a very positive thing for Sacramento because this was once again during the Depression to get this very large complex. And this is the main administration building and in a modern style. And this is how it looks today. And it's just a very, very attractive building. And there are multiple buildings. There's officer quarters. And it's just wonderful how it's been preserved. This is actually the conference room for the building I just showed you. Once again, they did a very nice job updating it whenever it was restored, I'm assuming over the last 20 to 25 years, and well maintained. And then this is also on this campus area and one of my favorite bas reliefs, and fits into, once again, that machine age, just kind of showing a abstract look at what aviation technology looks like in the creative mind of a bas relief artist. And it's just a very compelling piece, I find. Another terrific piece, now I'm going to talk a little bit about neon since it was so part of the Streamline era, and that is the Records neon sign that was originally associated with Russ Solomon, the founder of Tower Records' father's store or drugstore within the Tower Theater building. And this is just a terrific neon. I'm so glad that it's been preserved. And it's a very, very a wonderful asset to history, particularly now that sadly Tower Records is no longer with us. Another great building is the Colonial Theater on Stockton Boulevard in Colonial Heights. And this photo was taken in 2013. So I have not been down there lately in the evening to see what the lighting situation is. Typically, neon does not wear well. Lights go out, they get broken, they need to be repaired. So at this point, it looked quite wonderful. And I hope they're staying on top of it because even with the Tower Theater, there are times where sadly half the lights are out. And then one last one I'm going to show. Unfortunately, this neon is no longer up, but it is Frank Fatt's original neon deco sign. Frank Fatt's was started at the location, I believe, in 1939. And of course, it still is there today, and it actually has a wonderful contemporary Art Deco interior. But happily, the building behind it, where you see those vertical piers, that office building is still there on the corner, and is a reminder that many elements of Art Deco still exist in Sacramento. I also want to take a moment here to mention that many of the photos I'm showing you are or were created by Bruce Woodward, who also has a wonderful walking tour of the Mather Field or Mather Park neighborhood. And I hope at some point in the future, once we get over the pandemic, that the Deco Society can begin doing walking tours again, because there are opportunities for our society to share Art Deco, but to do it is a little bit more complicated right now. Now I'm going to take just a brief moment. My interior lighting has gone out, but I will be back in just one moment. Continuing on, this next category, decorative tile, is very, very near and dear to my heart. Probably my second favorite subject matter besides Art Deco is decorative tile. And when I speak of decorative tile, I'm speaking of a little longer span of time, really the 1880s up through World War II, when modern building techniques really made decorative arts and terracotta or architectural terracotta less desirable. It would just stop being used. But there are just some terrific examples in Sacramento, a decorative tile. And of course, we are also the home of Gladding McBean. So always of great interest. This first tile is actually a piece of a larger unit that I'm going to share, but it's a great example of a transition piece, a piece that shows a little bit arts and crafts, a little bit of Orientalism that was very popular during the teens and 1920s. And then you start to see the motifs of the black and the yellow, the floral pattern of Art Deco. This is a splash back panel of a drinking fountain I discovered during the 2016 Elmhurst Preservation Sacramento walking tour. And it's in the Coloma School on T Street, and I had no idea that it was there, and I was just so pleased to discover it because as I mentioned, I love the tile, I love illustration. I will mention that professionally, for many years, I was a graphic designer. I worked with many commercial illustrators. And so this just really, I thought was a great, great piece. Unfortunately, I do not know who the manufacturer was. If anyone knows, please reach out to me because I'd love to find out. It's one of these little research projects I haven't had a chance to do a deep dive on as yet. And then here's the entire unit together. And you can see it when you see it in its setting. This school, I believe, was built in 1921. So it's still very much the arts and crafts movement, even though we're now into the early 20s. And I will also mention that while Art Deco really came a force in major metropolitans like Los Angeles and New York in the mid-20s, for Sacramento and many mid-size and regional cities, Art Deco didn't really hit until the mid-30s and then lingered on after World War II. So this isn't surprising at all that you know, within Sacramento, arts and crafts was still a force in the early 20s, as well as other styles like Spanish Revival, Italian Revival. Now here's my third major Art Deco building in Sacramento I'm going to talk about, and once again it is with almost stone's throw of the two previous buildings I shared, the Forum building and the S&H Crest building, and this would be the old IOOF building or Oddfellows building on K in 9th. It is actually on the northeast corner. And it was built in 1880 in what was called the Second Empire style, which was a French style with mansard roof, very ornate, very kind of maybe Victorian, if you're trying to imagine what it looked like. But it was, once again, reclothed during the 30s in a Deco style. The architect who did the redesign was Charles Dean, a well-known Sacramento architect. And of course, this is what it looks like today. And once again, this is also Gladding McBean tile. And also, I love the color. Green, this kind of emerald green or dusty green is very emblematic of the Art Deco period. And if you look closely, the spaniels once again have decorative triangles and chevron shapes. But I think what's most interesting and maybe most overlooked about this building is the first floor retail shops that line both 9th as well as originally K Street. And they're very small, very intimate, and have just a great feel. And they have many elements of Deco, from the rounded wall edges. All of the tile is of Deco treatment. The windows that have no mullion at the corner, just the glass budding up. And here in this particular, the store shop person actually, I love the shoes in the window. And you can see that there's actually two types of black tile. And then here's another close-up of just one of the tiles. I believe they're 6x6s. And yet again, once I do not know who the manufacturer of the tiles were. Before World War II, from like the turn of the century, there were hundreds of tile makers in America. Some with more notable names, some that were rather small. You know, in Southern California, some of the names are like Batchelder and Malibu. And sometimes some of these tiles are actually quite valuable if you're lucky enough to find one as a singular piece. Another building that has wonderful tiles and is I got to say it's not really a building, it's a campus that took me years. I moved to Sacramento in 1997. I actually didn't get out to Grand Union High until about 3 years ago. And that was discovery that it has so much of its decorative arts still in place. It's a wonderful campus. Half the campus was built as a WPA project, this time by another notable Sacramento architect, would be Devine. And it's just a great campus. That would be Harry Devine Sr. 2 years ago, I just showed you the flyer. We did a walking tour, but prior to the walking tour, we actually had a short concert with Dave Marino. He's actually there at the organ, and projected up on a screen, we were showing different actual shots of the organ instruments or the organ chambers. And it was just a kind of a wonderful prelude to a walking tour we did around campus. We had a terrific turnout and actually had 2 tours going. But here's what I really want to show you, speaking about Art Deco tile in Sacramento. So here's a terrific vintage photo. One of the other features of Grand Union High School was that they had some real interesting amenities. Amenities you would never find in a high school, probably then and certainly not today. And those amenities included a soda fountain, which the kids are coming out of. It had its own radio station. It had its own aviation repair department, like auto shop. They had aviation shop. They had a couple of small hangars. And that was tied to its proximity to the air depot. So just a wonderful, wonderful campus, but luckily they still have some of the tile. So previously, like, while most of the tile is there, sadly, because of ADA, the foreground, you see concrete. There were original steps there. And then over on the right-hand side wall, you see a space where there's no blue tile. There was actually a window there. There was a window where kids could buy tickets to plays in the auditorium, games in the Art Deco gym that was a separate building. So sadly that no longer exists, but most of the tile is still there. This is just to give you a taste of many of the other types of tile around campus. The only exception to that, the upper left-hand corner is this terrific, once again, geometric machine age. This is in the auditorium. That's actually one of the screen coverings for the organ pipe chambers. Another school that has wonderful tile is C.K. McClatchy Senior High School. And this sign, even this sign, I think is often overlooked. It's right on Freeport Boulevard, but it's kind of under the tree and it's not easily noticeable. But boy, if there's ever a terrific remnant, the sign part has been redone. And I know the sign has been redone because I worked for about 12 years for Bob Ricella at Ricella Company. Some of you may know the name Bob Ricella, and I know this came through a request from the Alumni Association to Bob to replicate the typography and how the type was laid out on the original sign. So while it's new, it was kind of lovingly done as close to how the original was done in 1937. But the real reason I'm talking about C.K. McClatchy High School is one of the true hidden treasures of Sacramento. In 1936, sadly, C.K. McClatchy passed away, and his wife and daughters decided to make a gift to the school of a flagpole, a plaque, and a fountain. And I'm going to concentrate on just the fountain. The plaque is quite wonderful because it was done by the same artist. I'm going to show you some bas-reliefs, but it was just a pleasure because I actually photographed the fountain just days before the pandemic. I photographed the fountain on March 11th after spending months of trying to get into the campus. This fountain actually exists in an enclosed, locked courtyard. There are big windows behind it. They're on a hallway so kids can see it or people can see it, but rarely do people get in to actually be near it. And while I like the safety element, it's kind of sad to me that it doesn't have a lot of access. So this gives you the full breadth, and this is a Gladding McBean project. And what's interesting to me about this is that this was probably done out of a Southern California manufacturing plant called Tropico in Glendale that Gladding McBean actually bought, I believe, in the 1920s. And what they were noted for, whereas Gladding McBean Lincoln did huge cast architectural pieces for high rises, Tropico was known for actually doing more detailed work in home tiles, as well as pottery and china. So they were much more equipped to do these custom illustration type tile projects. Now, while I think it's fantastic that this fountain has survived, I'd like to point out some of the, and sadly it has some damage. You can see a steel plate below the illustration of a mission. If you look closely, the bottom ring against the concrete has been replaced with not blue tile, which I'm guessing it was originally, but with marble. But by and large, given the complexity of this piece, it's amazing it's intact. There are 8 illustrations in total, and I'm just going to highlight 2. Of course, there's an example of early exploration, the mission system. There are 8 illustrations, all dealing with California history. And then the part I love the best are these lions' heads, because if you're familiar with C.K. McClatchy High School, their mascot is the lions. So I've kind of worked, so we've talked about large buildings of high deco and Streamline in Sacramento. We've talked about tile. Now I'm going to speak about Art Deco and the WPA in Sacramento and a little bit outside our outskirts of town. And that is because, sadly, successful metropolitan areas have a tendency to tear down their old buildings. And while there aren't any larger examples of Art Deco in Sacramento than the ones I showed you that existed and that were torn down, but there were many, many smaller retail buildings, bowling alleys, really wonderful, interesting buildings that were torn down for redevelopment. So in the case of looking for buildings that still exist, some of the best examples are actually in small towns outside of Sacramento. So in the 1920s and 30s, of course, we had the Great Depression, and the US government created multiple programs, many programs, over 40 programs under the umbrella of the WPA. And they got busy and they helped communities build all kinds of buildings all over the country, including courthouses. Now, architect of some renown in Sacramento, George C. SELLON, who was California's first architect, he was the one who did a couple of courthouses, and I'm going to give you an example. And that would be the courthouse he did for Nevada County in Nevada City. And to me, this is just, it just doesn't, as a smaller building, doesn't get any better in terms of Streamline, Moderne, picking up on that whole kind of building going, ocean going. The front facade just absolutely speaks of going sailing. This is an interesting building in that it also exemplifies where in smaller towns, it was too expensive to tear down the entire building. It was much better to get more bang for the buck to look modernized by basically keeping the rear part of the building and once again attaching a new facade. And that is the case with the Nevada City Courthouse, is that the original courthouse is in brick, is underneath the new Streamline Moderne facade. I meant facade. But once again, I love the lettering is quite attractive. And then when I'm out looking at buildings, I love to discover if they still have their dedication plates. And this is the dedication plate for the courthouse. You can see George C. SELLON's name. And it's just a wonderful, quick identifier, very helpful in figuring out who the builder was and who the architect was. Now, when I was doing my WPA research project, and I do have a WPA lecture, I discovered that certain architects were much better at just, dare I say, working the system and knowing how to work with federal grants, working with the WPA in particular, and basically how to put the monies and the projects together. And while other names like Charles Dean and Harry Devine Sr. and Leonard Stark, some of the other notable architects of Sacramento, weren't necessarily as active in WPA as George C. SELLON. I take that back. Actually, Harry Devine was probably the second most active, but SELLON did a couple of projects of some renown, and this is another one. He did the West Sacramento, at the time, Washington Firehouse. And of course, this is what it looks like today. And it's wonderful that preservation has helped it stay preserved, and it's been a wonderful adaptive reuse project, and you know, just thrilled that we have it. And then also, when I was doing a WPA, working on WPA lecture a couple of years ago, I came across a wonderful binder of pictures at the Center for Sacramento History, where I also do a lot of research, and came to discover that they had a binder that was put together by one of the WPA foremen. His territory was obviously north of Sacramento, maybe as far as Chico, and he documented all types of WPA projects, including this Butte County Hospital, which I never heard about. And then I did some research and looked up articles, news articles, and came out to find out it may be my most favorite Art Deco building in all of Northern California. And this is the hospital as it looked when it opened in the late 30s. And if there was ever a seagoing, Streamline Moderne building, this is it. And here's a wonderful period postcard showing it. It's actually kind of in a C shape two identical wings with a connecting center, with the main entrance being on the other side of the building. We're looking northeast, and the real entrance would be on the north side of the building. So I've now had an opportunity to be out and take a look at it from the distance. Unfortunately, the building had been closed because of issues. It was too expensive to renovate, but the county did not pull it down. And interestingly enough, the building has had a second wonderful life in the last 2 years. It was used after the campfire to house over 500 animals that were abandoned or lost during the campfire up in Paradise. And it included 200 to 300 cats, over 150 dogs. It included birds, just kind of an amazing story. So it kind of loved to hear, and it tickled my heart, I guess it would be the best expression. So once again, George SELLON also did this project, and it's just a terrific, and I was surprised. As deep I am into Art Deco, I'd never heard about the building until doing my WPA research. Another favorite series of mine in Sacramento are the bas-reliefs. And from my perspective, I think this might be the best series of artifacts we have from the Art Deco period are actually our bas-reliefs. So of course, as you might have anticipated, I can't tell this story without telling and talking about Gladding McBean again. This is actually a 1925 photo at the Gladding McBean factory, and shows their artists. Many of their artists were from Italy, and I'm going to talk about one artist because I've done a lecture on this person. He was one of the last Italians to be hired out of Milan, and his name is Carlo Taliabue. And this is he. He'd only been probably at the factory under a year, and that's him. And I mention him because when the Depression hit, Gladding McBean really cut down on doing their traditional architectural terracotta work. The work just wasn't there. And so many of the artists drifted away from Lincoln, but Carlo stayed around in Sacramento and became kind of the go-to artist for any of the larger projects that were still in the neighborhood during his 1930s in town. So a project he worked on were the state buildings for the state of California on N Street. And if you're familiar with these buildings, they have wonderful, wonderful terracotta entrances. What you're looking at is terracotta surround. There are 3 unique illustrated bas-reliefs on the left and right, and then on the capitals are actually the state bear. And there are actually 2 sets of these. One set was for the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the other was for the Department of Public Works. And the irony is that both of these buildings are now housing different state departments. And in this case, we're looking at the originally Public Works building, and it's now the Department of Transportation. So there's kind of a misalignment of subject matter, but that doesn't mean that the tiles still aren't terrific. So this is one of the details, water resources. Here's another one for highways. Here's a look at the actual vertical central tower of the building. Now we're going to look at a couple of the bas-reliefs for the Department of Motor Vehicles, which now is Department of Agriculture. Motorcycle cops, license, be sure you have your license plate. And I'm going to go back one before we talk about this piece. So all these pieces were done by Carlo Taliabue, this Italian. And what's most fascinating about it, if you look at the breadth of his work, he was actually kind of a classical sculptor. The kind of sculptures you would see him do, you almost thought he was trained in classical Rome. And what I love about these pieces he did for these two buildings is they're much more playful and illustrative, really different than what he had done in the past, and really showed him, you know, kind of stretching himself to be kind of current. There's almost kind of a dare I say, Dick Tracy comic book flair to it. So given that he had a chance to get the remaining work in Sacramento, Carlo also did some other important pieces. And another important piece he did, also a WPA project, were originally two water towers, one in East Sac and one near Sacramento Junior College. And it didn't have much detailing to the concrete structure, but Carlo Taliabue did do these wonderful concrete bas reliefs of an Indian woman, of course, with a water jug. And I've admired these pieces for years, and I've also admired the small detail, almost kind of in the lower right-hand corner, it's almost Indian calligraphy piece. And I just thought, well, it must, because I knew Taliabue liked to add those features to some of his pottery. He actually did personal pottery projects, until I had conducted a walking tour of City College about 3 years ago, and a fellow Sacramento Art Deco Society member, and many of you will know him if you've seen his lectures, because he's a fantastic Art Deco building photographer. His name is Randy Jester. He took a close-up picture of that lower right-hand icon, and to my amazement, in the concrete, of all things, there was C. Taliabue's name. So I just got a kick out of that, because I'd been wanting for years to actually identify this officially. I mean, I always assumed that this bas relief was Taliabue's, but I never had confirmation in writing, and Randy was able to give that to me. So that was, you know, very positive and fun thing for me to find out. And then another person you might think of in relationship to architecture, but who actually also was quite a creative soul, and also was involved in some bas relief projects, was Alfred Eichler. And I don't know if you know that name. Alfred Eichler was lead architect for the California Department of Architecture for many, many years. And he was a fascinating person, very talented, but he had a tragedy as a child. He got meningitis as a 13-year-old and became deaf. And he really struggled in his early career trying to get established. No formal architecture school would take him. He had some family connections, so he ended up actually, he was born in the late 1890s. He ended up actually going to Washington, D.C. and working for the Navy Department to kind of work his skill as being a draftsperson. And through his own tenacity, was able to actually get credentialed as an architect. And he kind of wandered the country of America trying to find and get established, finally getting hired by the California Department of Architecture in 1925. He had been about 30 at the time, and I believe this photo was probably taken about that that period. He's, of course, most well known for the Tower Bridge, but over his long career, he did dozens of state buildings, dozens. But today, I'm just going to talk about some bas-reliefs he was involved in. So some of you may recognize this. This is the Department of Disabilities. It's originally, sadly, yet another building that is not currently housing the department it was originally intended for. It was originally, these bas-reliefs were designed with the Department of Education in mind. And, you know, once again, I've been in Sacramento 23 years, and I would drive by these, you know, bas-reliefs for years and never really took the time to stop and look at them. And when I finally did, the first thing that hit me is I figured, you know, intellectually, there are probably 4 or 5 different designs, and then they repeat them. But actually, there were quite a few more than that. Before I reveal that, I'd also like to mention another thing, and that is, this is the theater or theater arts bas-relief. Is that originally I probably weren't intended to be, you know, bright white on an orange background. You know, they're probably in a neutral color. So it's kind of interesting to always, reflect how is statuary or how is art originally intended to be seen. So I just wanted to take kind of one and just kind of turn back to a neutral color to kind of reflect on what they originally looked like. What I've just put up is also, Alfred Eichler was such a creative soul. This was his own hand-drawn logo. This is how he would typically in the quarter of many of his art pieces, as well as drawings for the state, would do his signature. So I will now reveal that there are 10 different subject matters, not 5 or 6, each addressing a different part of education and kind of equally distributed between men and women. And it's just a wonderful set. And prior to researching this, there was no good documentation. I mean, I could not find anywhere, even with the state, of who formally actually did the artwork and the carving of these bas-reliefs. I had assumed it was either Carlo Taliabue, who I just showed you several of his pieces, including all of these wonderful bas-reliefs on the in-street buildings. And then I suspected it might be another artist by the name of O.C. Malmquist, who is an artist who did some wonderful pieces for the Capitol Annex. But here this last year, and I'm going to throw out another shout out to the Sacramento Public Library, they recently put online the final set of decades of Sacramento Bee that is searchable from their website. So now you can search the entire Sacramento Bee from roughly 1860 to near present day. And they did it in blocks. They first did the first block roughly 1860 to 1900, let's say 3 years ago, and then 2 years ago, they released 1940 to present. And then finally, my periods, the 20s and 30s that I love most dearly, they released 1900 to 1940, which has been a godsend because it's helped me with several other lectures I've developed in the last 18 months. And it helped me figure out the mystery of who did these bas-reliefs. And I found in an article in the Sacramento Bee, of all things, that it gives Alfred Eichler credit for designing these bas-reliefs and then working with a sculptor to finish them out and get them cast and up on the building. So, you know, I was just, when I discovered this, I was just elated because it gave me another insight into Alfred Eichler, because I had known him first as a architect, secondly as a watercolor painter, which I'm not going to be able to go into that at all this evening. And then thirdly, I have now discovered that he actually did or supervised some other bas reliefs for other buildings that he developed in the state architect's office. So a great, great story. So I'm now going to reveal the last two of this set of 10 bas reliefs. And they are reliefs for the School of the Blind and the School of the Deaf. And I thought, you know, this is something that, you know, once again, speeding by in a car, you're never going to put together. But I finally did. And I thought, boy, how appropriate for this unique man who, you know, really had to persevere, then had a terrific career at the state of California, to in discussing and deciding on which 10 bas reliefs to have, that he included the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf. And I will also mention that Alfred Eichler was instrumental in putting together, designing, and supervising the campus for the deaf and blind that was built just south of UC Berkeley in the 1930s up through the 1940s. That campus has now been taken over by UC Berkeley, and the new School for the Deaf and Blind is actually down in Fremont. But just another part of Alfred Eichler's unique story. This is the last bas relief I'm going to talk about, and this is of, or actually was created as a series of 1 of 5 for the portico on the east annex of the state capitol. And some of you might be aware that the east annex is in jeopardy. It's probably going to be, or potentially, torn down, and there's a lot of discussion about what's going to happen, what's going to be saved. Certainly these large aluminum panels, which are roughly, and this is a guess, 4 feet by 6 feet, and there are 5 of them with different subject matters. Of course, this is the panel of industry and fits in that whole machine age look. What's going to happen to them? I have a lot of concern for them, because while I'm sure they'll be preserved, my fear is they will go into a crate and sadly be stored away and not see the light of day for a long time. So, you know, I'm hopefully going to get involved in kind of championing them, because whatever, if a new building is put up, my hope would be they would honor these great panels and get them into the new building. In addition to these 5 panels, there's also up on the building, almost like spandrels near the windows. I think it's a total of 13 different types of flora and fauna of California. They're smaller, but they're just as attractive, and they were all done by this artist, O.C. Malmquist, who was a Bay Area artist. I'll also mention, you know, I'm speaking about, these are 2 men that I've done a lot of research now on, Malmquist and Taliabue. They were also very, very much involved in the 39 exposition on Treasure Island. And so they both had a very significant body of work. I've had an opportunity to actually do a lecture on Taliabue, but I haven't had that opportunity with Malmquist. Another great series in Sacramento is murals as associated with social realism. And I use the term, I wanted to while WPA murals are often associated with the Art Deco period because they found their way into Art Deco buildings, by and large, their aesthetic style is a little bit different in the sense that they aren't what I would consider true kind of reflection of the Art Deco period, but they're definitely reflective of the period as they're tied to the architecture of the time. And of course, during the Depression, there are many programs under the WPA that provided money to artists to do murals, including the first mural I'm going to talk about. This is the logo of the Federal Art Project that sponsored a lot of murals. And they sponsored a mural here in Sacramento, and it's a mural that's in this building. And this is a Art Deco building, part of several buildings done by Harry Devine Sr. on the campus in the 30s. And unfortunately, of the 4 buildings that were originally done, 2 have been torn down. The auditorium, the facade has been redone. The rest of the complex is very familiar, but there's now a new facade partly in front of what we're looking at here. This is a vintage photo, and then the gym. But I'm not going to get into too much depth because I want to talk about the interior, and most specifically the Ralph Stackpole WPA mural, which is just a beautiful piece. It's 30 feet wide, roughly 8 to 9 feet high, and this is how it looks today. The campus auditorium went through a major renovation about 10 years ago, and they were very careful to protect and restore. The mural has this large information panel below it, which is nice. What I've just brought up, another discovery and yet another archive, is this is an actual original drawing by Ralph Stackpole for the mural. It's, while the mural is 30 feet, this drawing's only 24 inches wide, but I was very happy to find this. It actually is in a large collection of mostly professor and student art in the Condos Gallery at the college. And I was just floored when the by and large archivist brought it out and showed it to me, because my impression is it hadn't been seen or shared with anyone in a very long time. And sadly, they also don't know how they got their hands on it. I would suspect that Stackpole maybe gave it to an administrator back in the 30s, and then eventually it found its way into the Condos collection, but that's just a guess. Now I'm going to go through each of the panels, left to right. This is the right panel, really addressing different industries in the Sacramento Valley and regions, including mining, lumber, agriculture. You can see a dredger. Some of the dredgers would have still been out in the vicinity of Rancho Cordova when Stackpole was here. The central panel is really talking about education and aspirations to education. And to show you how kind of interesting story, many of the people in this mural are identified. For example, the seated gentleman was a professor on campus. Several of the young women were modeled after women who were on campus that summer. Stackpole tried to integrate, different parts of the working environments, including, in the background, you can see high tension power structures. And I've also just kind of dawned on me that, what is this angular wall behind the students to the right? And all I can figure at this point is that it is maybe a flood wall. It just kind of struck me. I don't know if that's true, but that's what kind of hit me after looking at this thing for years. And then finally, to the right, we have some of the other industries which were reflected on unique programs at City College. City College was one of the first schools, public schools of any kind in America, to have an aviation program. where they actually trained pilots, FAA pilot licenses, and how to replane aircraft. And so upper left, we see the original hangar at SAC Executive Airport, which at the time was Sacramento Municipal. Upper left, we can see the Capitol, of course, like a DC-3 on the tarmac. In the foreground, we have a student drawing, possibly the young woman on the right-hand side. We have theater people. Someone is working on the drapery of the theater set. So it's a really nice reflection and aspirational image for students on the campus. And oh, before I forget, you can also see in the background a Streamline train on the tracks behind the hangar. So I also like to give a little bit of history of each of these artists as I go through them, as you can probably tell. And here's a picture of all things, Ralph Stackpole with two of his very good friends, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And you know, not only did Stackpole do 3 important projects in Sacramento, including, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fountain in Cesar Chavez Plaza, a statue in Louis Yalin Park, as well as the mural. He was also really well connected. He met the Riveras in Paris in the 20s. He actually was instrumental in bringing them to San Francisco first in the early 30s. They lived with him for several months, and then he brought them back for the World's Fair. Diego Rivera did his crown piece of maybe of his career. He did a 20 by 80 mural on site in front of spectators over several weeks, if not months, at the 1939 World's Fair. So this picture is actually of Stackpole in his carving yard in San Francisco off Montgomery Street. Now I'm going to talk about a few other WPA murals. Of course, we associate murals with post offices. This is the Woodland Post Office, and it looks very much like this today. But it has 2 wonderful farm life murals by an artist by the name of George Harris. Thomas Hayes was really his assistant. And they remind me very, very much of Grant Wood, who did the famous painting American Gothic. And these are still up. They're not in the best of condition. I'm a little bit worried about for their safety, but it's fantastic that they're still up. And then another favorite is the large Maynard Dixon. And it's just a terrific, and if you've never had an opportunity, you know, hopefully once the pandemic is over, it will open up again and you can have an opportunity to get in and see it, because it's an awe-inspiring mural. Here's a close-up detail of man with all the new machinery. And then a vintage shot of Dixon up on the scaffolding, actually painting the mural. Here's another terrific mural that very few people know about. Another important person, Millard Sheets. Millard Sheets was really a Southern California artist. He's most famous for doing all of those murals associated with Home Savings Bank. He did over 80 of them for Home Savings in the 50s and 60s, maybe even to the 70s. But this was done in 1948. And the building is the old, originally American Trust, then Bank of America. And it's been closed for about 10 years. It used to have the Sacramento Restaurant, or excuse me, California Restaurant Association. Here's a close-up. And then here's a picture as a young man in the 20s, very handsome Millard Sheets, photographed by another very famous artist, George Harrell, a Hollywood portrait artist. most famous for his portraitures of MGM movie stars. And then this is the last section. And this is one I really have delved into more recently from where I originally thought this program was going to go. And because I realized, you know, when we're talking about hidden, and to give another shout out to my fellow Sacramento Art Deco Society member, Bruce Woodward, who, when he shared many of the photos I'm sharing, he said, hidden in plain sight. And it's true. Many times we can go by things and we don't have a good look at them, even though we see them every day. In this case, I'm diving into things that never have seen or rarely seen the light of day. So because of that, the first facility I'm going to talk to you about is the State Parks Museum Center that has all of State Parks items that are not currently on display. And it is a huge warehouse. And if you're familiar with Indiana Jones, I believe this is from Indiana Jones and the Glass Skull, where Indiana has been brought to look for one of the rare artifacts by Russian spies. And I wanted to share it with you because it reminds me of this. This is just one portion of the State Parks facility at Mather Park. And I want to make sure I got the name correct, California Statewide Museum Collections Center, known by the acronym SMCC. And last year, I finally got in there with a small group. They will do group tours if you schedule one with a small group pre-pandemic. And I said, well, gosh, what do you got? I see all wonderful vintage stuff, but I don't see much Art Deco. Do you think you have some? They said, well, let's do a deep dive. And this is actually pulled from some of the paperwork where you can actually see search results for _Marwick request. And different stuff came up that really confused me. One was just this description of 3 facade panels, Art Deco. And I said, what are those? And they said, we really don't know. So they went out and pulled them out of storage and took some pictures of them for me. Here's just a close-up showing a little bit of that was the only information I had. This is a close-up, and they turned out to be, you know, not spectacular, but really fun. I have no idea what building in California they came off of, which is kind of unfortunate. They're about 4+ feet high. So consequently, you know, together they're about 7 feet long. So they're just beautiful. But it's so sad to me as an amateur historian not be able to tie history to the objects. The center also has 6 terrific WPA murals, one of which I'm sharing here. It's Artichoke Pickers by Henrietta Shore. I know for a fact this was in the Monterey Post Office. It was updated in the 60s and eventually found its way into State Park hands. But once again, its artist was very interesting. Her name was Henrietta Shore. She was part of the 1930s era of artists on the Monterey Peninsula. This picture is actually of her by her good friend Edward Weston. I'm going to show just 2 of the 6. This is my other favorite one from that group. It's Roadwork on Big Sur Highway by James Fitzgerald. Once again, they know it's from Monterey, or at least believe it's from Monterey, but they do not know how it was used, what building it may have hung in. So I did a little research on James Fitzgerald because I wasn't familiar with his name. This is self-portrait done in 1932. And my gosh, it turned out that I will also share personally that I spent some formative years, junior high school on the Monterey Peninsula, spent a year at Monterey Peninsula Community College. I have very fond memories of living on the peninsula and still have friends on the peninsula, Monterey Peninsula. So I was just delighted to find out and very impressed that James Fitzgerald was part of a kind of an intellectual group of writers, musicians on the Monterey Peninsula in the 30s that included John Steinbeck, Ed Doc Ricketts, John Cage, and others. It just, the names rattled off, and it just very much impressed me because it makes me wonder, you know, what brings together, makes a time and a place so interesting to bring together that creative group of people. And boy, I'd love to have been a fly a wall for their conversations. And then here's one more little test. Any ideas? Any guesses? This is a close-up of another terrific Art Deco artifact I found at the Museum Center for the state. Turned out to be this: a bar, a round bar, a bar that's just streamlines and chrome and aluminum. And when I walked by it, you know, I just kind of went, I had to stop on the tour. I said, what is this? And what is the history? And you can see a piece of paper hanging there. It is a Xerox of some information on it that I'm going to share here in the moment of a cleaner copy explaining that this is a bar off of this train. It's out of the bar car of the Daylight, which was Southern Pacific's premier train between San Francisco and Los Angeles. There was actually every day they ran one in each direction, and it was you know, very notable of the classic era of streamlined trains. And if you look in the upper right hand of this spread, this comes out of the 1937 March issue of the Southern Pacific Bulletin magazine. Here's the bar. So I blew this up, and you get a much better impression of the bar. Once again, while I think it's terrific they had the bar, gosh, I wish they had the whole thing, because you can see the divider panels, probably etched glass, lighting in the ceilings. And then if you turn around, this is what it looked like in the other direction. Would love to have lunch or a drink on that, in that car. Just would be fun. Headed to San Francisco or LA. Which leads me to another institution that I have spent a lot of time in, and I couldn't do anywhere near the amount of Alfred Eichler or Gladding McBean. And at this point, I'd like to give a shout out to Gary Kuritz, because he was instrumental in bringing in many of the collections, showed wonderful leadership and guidance to what's known as the California History Section, or the California History Room, within their facility, which is on the other side of N Street from the old California State Library, is their rare book room. This is on one of the archive crawl days. And this is typically the room, if you go to do research and they have different levels of materials, if the material is important enough, then they put the material in the, you check it out, they put it in the room, you review it, and it's just a wonderful experience. California State Library. Now I'm going to show some pieces I've discovered out of their collection. Since we just talked about the Daylight, here's a terrific poster. In addition to, you know, books and manuscripts and photos, they also have flat art and posters. The California History section is where Alfred Eichler chose to put a large portion of his California plein air watercolor collection. They have 85 pieces of Alfred Eichler's watercolors. More examples of period posters. And then they have a collection that, if you're an Art Deco person, this is for me like the fountain at McClatchy High School. And this is, in a way, this collection is tied to the McClatchy High School because the same pottery division of Gladding McBean did these drawings. And these illustrations, so the California section, history section, has a group of drawings, Gladding drawings, from Los Angeles that were donated by what's known as the Brand Library, which is another wonderful research library in LA. And at some point, I'm anticipating they realized that the California State Library had received most of the vintage photos and office papers of Gladding McBean, that it would be very appropriate for them to have these illustrations. So they are terrific. I'm just going to show three. I'm going to show you three details and then the whole drawing. This is for a yacht club in Chicago. As a deco person, it doesn't get any better than this. This is, interestingly enough, more of a home setting assignment. Can you imagine having Gladding McBean to design this pool setup for you? I'm anticipating Hollywood movie studio mogul for this one. Unfortunately, I do not know who commissioned this project or if it was ever completed. And then this very adorable close-up of a pig. This was custom tile done for the Pig and Whistle restaurant chain, which was a Southern California entity, with really over-the-top stylized deco floral. And then another institution I'd like to talk about, because I'm also on their board through the Sacramento History Alliance, which is the board that is associated with the Sacramento History Museum and the Center for Sacramento History. These are, of course, neons at Golden One Arena. And when the arena was being developed, the King's management was interested, was presented with the idea, was interested, helped get the signage restored and up into their food court, one of their food courts. And it's just terrific that they're out and being seen and being enjoyed. I don't think many people realize that they come out of the Center for Sacramento History, which is, of course, the repository for archives and artifacts for the city and county of Sacramento. But they're terrific, but they're still technically part of the center's collection. Center for Sacramento History. Here's a close-up of another sign I worked very close to here. You may recognize this sign was up on a pole in front of one of the mansions on 24th Street near X, or a block before, actually near V, for many, many years. It was there when I first came to town, and luckily it got saved and went into the collection, fully restored. And now I'm going to mention that, sadly, the center has, in addition to those signs that are in the arena, has about a dozen or more other large signs that are waiting to see the light of day. And one is the Rosemont Grill sign that originally hung on 9th Street. The building is still there. It's yellow and green tile, of all things, not in the best of shape, on 9th between J and K. But at some point, I'm going to give you a little history on the sign and explain how it got to the center. This is the 30s. And then the Rosemont Grill family decided to move it out, the restaurant out to Folsom Boulevard in the 40s. And you'll recognize the building because it has new restaurants in there and has been actually through a couple ownerships in the last 10 years. But this is out of my own personal collection, the matchbook that kind of shows its time on Folsom Boulevard. And then eventually it came by and was donated to the center. And originally it was at the Richards facility, but luckily Center for Sacramento History needed more space and got space at Mather Park. And here shows the sign on a flatbed getting prepared to be moved from Richards Boulevard area out to MacArthur Park. Did I say MacArthur Park? That's Los Angeles. Mather Park, Freudian slip. And here it's arriving at the warehouse at Mather with some of its other brothers and sisters. And I also get a kick out of the fact that in the background, the particular warehouse is of a 30s era. So it has some nice detailing, makes for a nice shot. Just a few more institutions that I wanted to give a shout out to. Another terrific institution is the Japanese American Archival Collection at Cal State. And this is a fan. You're seeing the two sides of the fan. The Tanakawa Company, and this is probably an advertising specialty, but it really speaks to when the town of Florin was a important Japanese American community, famous for its strawberry farms. And I just love this piece because it's just very much 1930s. The swimming suit is just terrific. I love the ocean liner in the background. And it's just a whimsical piece. And many times when I make deco discoveries, I'm as thrilled about the small things as I am the big things. When I was putting this final section together, I also reached out to some of the curators or librarians, and I said, you know, what piece would you like or think would be appropriate? And this piece comes from the Sacramento Room, James Scott, who you may know, who's the lead librarian at the Sacramento Room. And I actually already knew about this piece. This is the 1930 yearbook for Sacramento High, the review. And yeah, it's just a fun piece. Speaks very much to the time, kind of a cross between, you know, this Valentino, Ramon Navarro with skyscrapers in the back. Very much a beautiful period piece. And then another wonderful institution is the City College Special Collections. And what you're looking at is one of their many, many photos of the campus. This is the old library that was torn down in 1996. That was done by Harry Devine as part of the 4-building complex I described earlier. But they have, within the library, is a terrific special collections room built out of decorative arts from the old library. Here you see one of the interior reading rooms from the old library, wonderful ceilings, streamlined lamps. But if you look at the end of the room, you can see doors and windows, and some of those have been saved for the special collections. So interestingly enough, the special collections room is on the 3rd floor of the new resource, what they call the resource center, and it's in the left rear corner. You actually have to go to some work to find it, and then you come down a narrow passage of book stacks, and there are these terrific doors with the leaded glass. So you can see in the original photo on the left are 2 similar doors. There were multiple sets of these doors in the library. And the library had many, many different types of etched glass, deco-themed windows. This is just one, and within the special collection rooms, they have several that are nicely framed and hanging. So this was actually, I have trimmed out the background, but you can see the ceiling reflection in the glass. And then in this case, I want to give a shout out to the librarian of special collections who has helped me immeasurably over the last 6 or 7 years on different projects I've worked on, art ball, looking at stories about yearbooks and yearbook artists on campus. So this is Caroline Harker, and hopefully once again, when the pandemic alleviates, the special collections will be open again. I'll also mention Sacramento Junior College, in addition to having aviation engineering, which was another unique department, just like Grant Union High School had an aviation department. Sacramento Junior College also had one of the first really strong junior college nursing programs, which exists to this day. So that's another one of the set of collections is clothing, background information on the nursing program, which continues to flourish at now Sacramento City College, including the new building you see at the corner of Freeport Boulevard in Sutterville, if you're ever in the vicinity of Land Park. As I understand it, that is mostly for nursing. And then this is my final piece of the night. And I would be remiss if I didn't do a shout out to the Crocker Museum. I've actually chosen a piece, and that's actually a little earlier. This piece is called Star Maiden. It's in bronze. It was done by Alexander Sterling Calder. You may know his name, probably because if you're thinking mobiles, you're thinking of his son, Alexander Calder. What a lot of people don't realize is that his father was a very famous and successful classical sculptor. He was head sculptor for the Pan Pacific Exposition in San Francisco in 1915. And as part of that project, he created Star Maiden. Star Maiden was going to be a featured statue. And here's Calder actually working on what I'm guessing is a half scale. And what happened was, this was an important sculpture because they actually cast 90 of them, of the Star Maidens, in bronze for the central court called the Court of the Universe at Pan Pacific Exposition. And it's just a wonderful piece. It's kind of what I consider a transition piece, because it pretends, all those wonderful silhouettes and dramatic silhouettes of females, from Erta to a variety of other types of artists who did dramatic images of women throughout the Art Deco period. So with that, I am now at the end.
So Bruce, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And I am going to say that we have room for just a few questions. So if anybody would like to raise their blue hand and ask them, we'll see if we have anyone who
I want to apologize in that my phone went dead, as will happen. So I totally lost track of my timing. So I hope I haven't run horribly over time.
No, you've done some of the typical lectures that we've done, but Dale Shaw does have a question. And
Okay.
Dale, I'm just going to say that if you'd like to unmute yourself, both your camera or at least your microphone, and ask the question yourself.
I think that this is more of a question to you, Mary Ellen.
Okay.
How do we access the recording?
Okay, so this recording, because I'm in Colorado, I was worried about doing it on my computer, went to the cloud, and I believe that Kelsey and I and Bruce all have access. So we will have it. We will be creating a new YouTube,
Okay, a new
YouTube site, because this is something that we think is really important to have out for the community to be able to see, and not just on the Renaissance site. But a copy will also go to Mike Agron, and it'll probably take about a week to 10 days, and he'll have it up as well.
Okay, and so it'll come on our Renaissance site, or?
Everybody, what I did, Dale, was I took pictures of everyone that was in the room. So everybody who came obviously will get it, but everyone who
Okay.
signed up for any of Bruce's talks will get it automatically.
It was wonderful, Bruce. Just
Well,
wonderful.
thank you. I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you for the feedback.
Thank you. And do we have any other questions? I have to tell you, every time I wrote down a question, you ended up answering it. That's how thorough you were, Bruce. But I do have one question if no one else does. And if you asked it and I missed it or answered, I apologize. What followed this movement? What kicked it out, literally from favor?
Well, yeah, basically modernism, or dare I say minimalism on the architecture side. It was during this time that Streamline Moderne eventually came what they call the international style, which was basically black steel and glass. And interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier on the Bauhaus, you know, Mies van der Rohe, the final president of the Bauhaus, ended up at something called the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he influenced generations of architects. And Walter Gropius, who was the first president of the Bauhaus, ended up at Harvard architecture. So they were both very influential in creating minimalism, really.
Right. And
the
then Dennis,
Barcelona chair, I don't know if anyone knows, the famous, sleek, low-slung Barcelona chair that is very much still popular with mid-century modern.
right.
That is Mies van der Rohe's design. It was designed for for a Barcelona pavilion. And then abstract expressionism also came in.
Right.
You know, so and then everything else from pop culture, Andy Warhol with pop art.
And Dennis would like to ask a question as well, unless he's clapping. I think Dennis is clapping.
Okay.
No, that's not me. I wanted if there were any examples of this deco art in the spaghetti factory, which was the old train station.
Yeah, excellent point. Absolutely. A matter of fact, it's recently gone through a renovation and simplified and cleaned up. They used to have a few more decorative posters from the 30s, but like some of the lamps and the ceiling lamps, although the ceiling lamps, many of them were recreated in the 70s. You know, the 1970s, there was a resurgence in interest in Art Deco. And the first iterations of the spaghetti factory, meaning when it was first redone, some of the detailing were lovingly done by people who wanted to kind of honor that period. So you are correct. Although the building itself, of course, is Mission and or Spanish Revival. And the other thing I wanted to mention about is that, you know, very much often in the 20s, people in their households would have a mishmash of things. You know, you'd have Victorian furniture next to Art Deco furniture. And so, you know, I think it's very common to, and I actually think it can be very expressive to have, you know, different time periods. And, you know, if you have a very modern piece, it's a modern piece, but if you put it against something of a different culture or a different style, then they both represent or mean more because you can see the difference.
Good. So one last question, if anybody wants to ask it, and if not, I'll give it just a minute. We're just going to say thank you again, Bruce, and we can't wait for us to be able to put this online so that other people can see it and to
I
see
have a question.
offering. Yes, Jennifer.
Yeah, the Alhambra Theater, is there any pieces or parts of it left anywhere in town? Or I know the fountain is by the Safeway.
Well, that's really it. And I'm glad you mentioned that because the fountain of all the detailing is probably the most kind of deco-esque or streamline, because most of the Alhambra was a kind of Moorish fantasy palace. So I'm glad you mentioned that, but sadly, no. You know, there's pieces of tile out there. I know some of the stained glass has ended up in different parts of the country. It's just unfortunate that we don't have more of it.
Actually, I know of a person, I don't know him that well, but I was in his house once. And he was part of the tear down of the Alhambra.
Mhm.
And some of the contractors just took pieces home. So he has some like lamps and I don't know, various, it's a few years since I've seen it, but he had several pieces from the Alhambra, which was pretty interesting because they just picked them up and took them home.
Well, I hope that you share that information with Mateus Bombal, who's done such an incredible job on the history of the theater, and we're hoping that he'll be one of our guest speakers. He's done, I think, the film's only a half hour, 43 minutes. We're hoping to show that
Yeah.
in the spring.
Yeah, I can find this guy's house, and he was very open to just, oh,
Yeah.
come on, and I'll show you all these things.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. And so I'm going to ask the last question and then we will close it up, Bruce. And that is that as much as you were thanking other people, were a lot of those photos your own photos that you were taking when you were still able to go out and about?
Yes, yeah. I would say most of the smaller things were mine and in some of the buildings, but yeah, I also want to honor the, as I mentioned, my co-Art Deco Society person, Bruce Woodward, is also, a wonderful. And then we have this other photographer who actually does things nationally, internationally, who does breathtaking work, and that is Randy Juster. And the Renaissance Society might be interested in reaching out to Randy at some point if there's greater interest in Art Deco.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope you finally do a book. So I want to thank
another ambitious project.
We do this every time, but every time you talk, it's like there's a book in there. You have the graphics for it. So again, I want to thank everyone for attending. This will be up soon. And make sure that you are aware when Bruce offers some programs next semester.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And Bruce, normally I'm going to ask if Kelsey is there for her to actually stop recording. But I always just leave a few minutes for us to just kind of do a debrief. People can leave, but just so that we don't, you and I feel like we just